Captain Sarah Chen's F-16 was 20 years older than the sleek F-35 surrounding her on the tarmac. While her squadron mates relied on computer-assisted targeting and beyond visual range missiles, Sarah still practiced gun runs and knife edge, turns that her Korean War veteran father had taught her in his garage. The other pilots called her methods museum pieces, and her aircraft Grandpa's ride. But when 5 enemy fighters ambushed their patrol over international waters and electronic warfare turned their billion-dollar jets into flying paperweights, Sarah's outdated training became the only thing standing between her squadron and annihilation. In 12 minutes of pure aerial combat, she would rewrite everything the Air Force thought it knew about dogfighting. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Nevada sun blazed mercilessly across Falcon Ridge Air Force Base as Captain Sarah Chen walked the flight line at 0530 hours, 2 hours before the morning briefing. The base hummed with the quiet efficiency of America's most advanced fighter. Wing, where $30 million F-35 Lightning IIs sat in climate-controlled hangars like technological marvels awaiting their daily missions. These fifth-generation fighters represented everything modern about air combat, stealth capabilities that made them nearly invisible to enemy radar, sensor fusion that created a comprehensive battlefield picture, and computer systems that could engage targets beyond visual range with surgical precision. At the far end of the tarmac, separated from the gleaming F-35s like a relic from another era, sat Sarah's F-16C Fighting Falcon. Tail number 442, call sign Iron Eagle, had been built in 1987 and bore the scars of countless training missions and 3 combat deployments. Its gray paint was faded and patched, the canopy scratched from desert sand, and its avionics suite was older than most of the pilots who flew the newer aircraft. Where the F-35s boasted touchscreen displays and voice-activated systems, Sarah's cockpit was a maze of analog gauges, toggle switches, and mechanical instruments that required constant attention and skilled hands to operate effectively. Colonel James Mitchell had made his position clear from the day Sarah arrived at Falcon Ridge 18 months ago. The future of air combat belonged to beyond visual range engagements, stealth technology, and networked warfare where pilots functioned as battlefield managers rather than individual combatants. Traditional dogfighting skills, in his view, were as obsolete as propeller aircraft and leather flight jackets. The colonel had earned his reputation by successfully integrating F-35 squadrons across 3 different bases, and his pilots consistently scored highest in computer-simulated combat exercises that emphasized long-range missile engagements and electronic warfare tactics. Captain Derek Viper Harrison embodied everything Colonel Mitchell valued in a modern fighter pilot. Tall, confident, and technically brilliant, Viper had graduated at the top of his class from both undergraduate pilot training and the F-35 transition course. His aircraft, a pristine F-35 with barely 300 flight hours, represented the cutting edge of American air superiority. Viper could lock onto targets at ranges Sarah's older radar couldn't even detect, and his missiles could kill enemy aircraft before they knew they were being hunted. In the squadron-ready room, he was treated with the deference reserved for top performers, his opinion sought on tactics, and his combat theories discussed with reverence. Sarah's background stood in stark contrast to the high-tech emphasis that defined Falcon Ridge. Her father, Colonel David Chen, had flown F-86 Sabres during the Korean War, engaging MiG-15s in close-quarters combat where split-second decisions and flying instincts meant the difference between survival and death. Her grandfather had piloted P-51 Mustangs over Europe, dogfighting with German fighters in aerial duels that required mastery of energy management, positioning, and marksmanship. These men had taught Sarah that flying was more than operating. Sophisticated computers, It was an art form that demanded physical skill, tactical intuition, and the ability to think and react faster than any machine. While her peers spent hours in computer simulators practicing beyond visual range intercepts, Sarah could be found in the oldest hangar on base, working with Staff Sergeant Maria Santos to maintain Iron Eagle's aging systems. Maria, a 20-year veteran who had worked on everything from A-10s to F-22s, understood that reliability often mattered more than sophistication. She had watched too many advanced systems fail at critical moments, leaving pilots dependent on basic flying skills that many no longer possessed. In Sarah, she recognized a pilot who could fly the aircraft manually if every computer failed, who could track targets by sight alone, and who understood that combat aviation was fundamentally about outmaneuvering and outfighting an opponent rather than merely operating superior technology. The squadron's morning routine reflected the technological divide that separated Sarah from her colleagues. While other pilots arrived to find their aircraft pre-flighted by dedicated crews and their mission data uploaded automatically to their systems, Sarah performed her own pre-flight inspection with the thoroughness her father had drilled into her since childhood. She checked control surfaces by hand, verified fuel levels with dipsticks rather than digital displays, and tested her gun system with the methodical precision of someone who might need to rely on it when missiles failed or were depleted. Her flight suit pockets bulged with backup instruments, paper charts, and a slide rule that her grandfather had used to calculate intercept angles before computers existed. The contrast became most apparent during squadron social events at the pit, the pilot lounge where informal hierarchies were established and maintained through casual conversation and good-natured rivalry. Viper would regale audiences with stories of simulated kills achieved at maximum range, describing how his F-35 sensors had painted enemy aircraft while they remained completely unaware of his presence. Other pilots would nod appreciatively and share their own experiences with advanced tactics that relied heavily on computer assistance and data link communications. When Sarah spoke, if she spoke at all, it was usually to discuss basic flying principles or to share insights her father had passed down about energy, management and positioning, topics that seemed quaint and irrelevant in an era of stealth fighters and smart weapons. The technological gap extended beyond aircraft to the very philosophy of air combat that defined modern military aviation. Current doctrine emphasized standoff engagements where American fighters would detect, identify, and destroy enemy aircraft from distances measured in tens of miles rather than hundreds of yards. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Pilots were trained to function as nodes in a larger network, sharing targeting data and coordinating attacks through secure communication systems that turned individual aircraft into components of a larger weapon system. Success was measured by kill ratios achieved through superior technology and tactics that minimized risk by avoiding close-range combat altogether. Sarah's training had emphasized exactly the opposite approach. Her father had taught her that air combat was ultimately personal and immediate, requiring pilots to outfly and outfight opponents through superior skill rather than superior equipment. She practiced gun tracking exercises that other pilots considered obsolete, maintaining proficiency with the M61 Vulcan cannon that most modern fighters carried but rarely used. Her tactical training focused on energy management principles that governed how aircraft gained and lost speed and altitude, knowledge that enabled skilled pilots to position themselves advantageously regardless of their aircraft's technological sophistication. Staff Sergeant Santos had watched this divide grow wider during her 2 decades of military service, and she found herself increasingly concerned about the squadron's over-reliance on technology. During her years maintaining A-10s in combat zones, she had seen simple, Rugged aircraft continue flying missions when more sophisticated fighters were grounded by computer failures or maintenance issues. She understood that Sarah's old-fashioned approach wasn't romantic nostalgia, but practical preparation for situations where advanced systems might fail or be compromised. The sergeant made it her personal mission to ensure that Iron Eagle remained in perfect mechanical condition, knowing that Sarah's survival might depend on the aircraft's basic reliability rather than its technological capabilities. The morning briefing room at Falcon Ridge reflected the base's commitment to cutting-edge technology. Wall-mounted displays showed real-time intelligence feeds, weather data, and threat assessments updated continuously by satellite communications and computer networks. Pilots sat before tablet computers that contained their mission profiles, emergency procedures, and tactical references in easily searchable digital formats. The room hummed with the quiet efficiency of modern military operations, where information flowed seamlessly between aircraft, ground stations, and command centers to create unprecedented situational awareness and tactical coordination. Colonel Mitchell typically began these sessions by reviewing the latest intelligence on potential threats and discussing how the squadron's advanced capabilities positioned them to dominate any conceivable air-to-air engagement. His presentations emphasized the F-35's ability to detect and engage multiple targets simultaneously while remaining invisible to enemy sensors, creating what he termed asymmetric advantages that made traditional dogfighting skills irrelevant. The colonel took particular pride in the squadron's performance during large-scale exercises where they consistently achieved favorable kill ratios against opposing forces flying older aircraft types. Sarah usually sat near the back of the briefing room, her own notebook open to hand-drawn diagrams and calculations that supplemented the digital displays surrounding her. While other pilots focused on the electronic order of battle and threat assessments provided by intelligence systems, Sarah studied weather patterns, terrain features, and tactical considerations that might affect close-range combat. Her notebooks contained detailed analyses of energy states, turning radii, and firing solutions that reflected the analytical approach her father had taught her to apply to air combat situations. The squadron's confidence in their technological superiority was reinforced by consistent success in training exercises conducted within controlled environments where variables could be managed and outcomes predicted. Computer simulations allowed pilots to practice engagement scenarios repeatedly without the expense and risk of live flying, and the F-35's advanced systems typically performed flawlessly under these artificial conditions. Victory in these exercises came to be seen as validation of modern air combat doctrine and proof that traditional flying skills were indeed obsolete in contemporary warfare. This technological confidence extended beyond individual aircraft to encompass the entire system of modern air warfare, including secure communications networks, satellite navigation systems, and electronic warfare capabilities that were designed to give American forces decisive advantages over potential adversaries. Pilots trained to function within this integrated system, relying on data links to share targeting information and coordinating their attacks through computer networks that enabled unprecedented tactical sophistication. The assumption underlying this approach was that American technological superiority would ensure that these systems would function reliably when needed most. Sarah's different perspective on air combat reflected not skepticism about technology, but recognition that even the most sophisticated systems could fail or be compromised under combat conditions. Her training emphasized self-reliance and individual skill as insurance against technological failures, preparing her to continue fighting effectively even if advanced systems were disabled or degraded. This approach required constant practice, with basic flying skills that other pilots considered unnecessary in an era of computer-assisted flight controls and automated systems. The philosophical divide between Sarah and her squadron mates extended to their understanding of what constituted Effective preparation for air combat. While the majority focused on mastering their aircraft's computer systems and practicing coordinated tactics that leverage technological advantages, Sarah spent her time developing flying skills that would remain effective regardless of technological circumstances. She practiced formation flying without radio communications, navigation using compass headings and visual landmarks, and gunnery techniques that relied on pilot skill rather than computer assistance. Staff Sergeant Santos had observed similar patterns during her career, noting that pilots who possessed strong basic flying skills adapted more quickly to new aircraft and performed more effectively when systems failed or were damaged. She had seen too many technically proficient pilots struggle when forced to rely on manual flying techniques or backup systems that required hands-on operation rather than computer interface. In Sarah, she recognized a pilot whose fundamental skills were sound enough to handle any situation that might arise, regardless of technological circumstances. The morning of March 15th began like countless others at Falcon Ridge, with pilots gathering for their routine briefing before beginning another day of training missions designed to maintain proficiency with the F-35's advanced systems. Colonel Mitchell reviewed the day's schedule, which included beyond visual range intercept practice and networked engagement, scenarios that emphasized coordination between multiple aircraft. The weather was perfect for flying, with clear skies and calm winds that would allow the sophisticated sensors and weapons systems to perform at their optimal effectiveness. Sarah listened to the briefing while mentally preparing for another day of flying Iron Eagle in training scenarios designed around capabilities her aircraft didn't possess. She had grown accustomed to participating in exercises where her older F-16 served primarily as a target for the F-35s to practice their long-range engagement techniques. Her role in these missions was typically limited to flying predictable patterns that allowed the newer aircraft to demonstrate their superior detection and engagement capabilities. As the briefing concluded and pilots began filing out toward their aircraft, Colonel Mitchell's voice carried across the room with its usual authoritative tone. The day's missions would demonstrate once again why the future of air combat belonged to pilots who embraced technological superiority rather than clinging to outdated methods that had been superseded by superior systems and tactics. Sarah gathered her materials and headed toward Hangar Bay 7, where Iron Eagle waited for another day of proving that some things never truly become obsolete. The squadron-ready room buzzed with the familiar energy of pilots preparing for the morning mission brief when Sarah entered carrying a worn leather portfolio that had belonged to her father. While her colleagues powered up their tablets and connected to the base's digital mission planning system, Sarah spread a hand-annotated sectional chart across the small table near the back of the room. The chart bore pencil marks indicating altitude blocks, threat corridors, and tactical notes written in her precise handwriting. She had spent the previous evening updating wind calculations and reviewing historical engagement data from similar mission profiles, preparing for scenarios that might require manual navigation and visual identification techniques. Captain Derek Harrison noticed her preparations first, his eyes immediately drawn to the anachronistic sight of paper charts in a room filled with cutting-edge technology. He nudged Lieutenant Jake Foster, one of the newer pilots who had arrived at Falcon Ridge 6 months earlier with fresh training that emphasized digital systems and networked warfare. Foster followed Viper's gaze and shook his head with barely concealed amusement at Sarah's old-fashioned approach to mission planning. The lieutenant had been taught that modern air combat required real-time data integration and computer-assisted decision-making, making paper charts as relevant as slide rules in a world of supercomputers. The morning briefing focused on a complex air-to-air training scenario designed to test the squadron's ability to engage multiple threats using beyond visual range tactics. Colonel Mitchell outlined the exercise parameters using an interactive display that showed enemy aircraft positions, friendly force dispositions, and engagement zones updated in real time through data link communications. The scenario emphasized coordinated attacks where F-35s would use their stealth capabilities to achieve first shot advantages against opposing aircraft that represented potential adversary threats. Success would be measured by kill ratios achieved through superior technology and tactics that minimized exposure to enemy weapons. When the tactical discussion turned to contingency planning for close-range engagements, Sarah raised her hand to address a gap she had identified in the mission profile. Her analysis suggested that environmental conditions and terrain features might force encounters at distances where traditional dogfighting skills would become relevant, particularly if electronic warfare degraded the advanced sensors that the planned tactics relied upon. She referenced historical examples where similar conditions had led to unexpected close-quarters combat, citing specific engagements from her father's era, where technological advantages had been negated by environmental factors and equipment failures. The room fell silent as Sarah spoke, her voice steady and professional despite the uncomfortable attention her observations had drawn from colleagues who viewed such contingencies as irrelevant in modern warfare. She described energy management, principles that governed aircraft performance during close-range maneuvering, explaining how altitude and airspeed could be traded strategically to gain positional advantages over opponents. Her presentation included hand-drawn diagrams that illustrated turning radii, climb rates, and acceleration characteristics that affected dogfighting performance, information that she had calculated manually using formulas her grandfather had taught her decades earlier. Captain Harrison interrupted Sarah's briefing with a laugh that carried clearly across the ready room, his voice dripping with condescension as he addressed her concerns about close-range combat scenarios. He reminded the assembled pilots that modern air warfare had evolved beyond the primitive tactics she was describing, emphasizing that F-35s were designed to detect and destroy enemy aircraft at ranges where dogfighting skills were simply irrelevant. Viper gestured toward the digital displays showing the exercise parameters, pointing out that the mission profile specifically emphasized beyond visual range engagements that would prevent the close quarters combat scenarios Sarah was worried about. Lieutenant Foster joined the criticism with his own observations about the futility of preparing for combat situations that modern technology had rendered obsolete. He noted that their F-35s carried advanced missiles capable of engaging targets at distances measured in tens of miles, making the turning fights Sarah described as likely as cavalry charges in modern ground warfare. Foster's comments drew nods of agreement from other pilots who had been trained to view technological superiority as the decisive factor in contemporary air combat, relegating individual flying skills to historical curiosity rather than practical necessity. The mockery intensified as other squadron members began offering their own commentary on Sarah's old-fashioned approach to air combat preparation. Captain Alex Thompson, who flew one of the squadron's newest F-35s, suggested that Sarah's manual calculations were about as useful as using an abacus to compute missile trajectories. His comment prompted laughter from pilots who viewed computer-assisted targeting and automated fire control systems as natural evolutions that had superseded the need for manual calculations and pilot-computed solutions. Thompson pointed out that their aircraft's sophisticated sensors could track multiple targets simultaneously while computing optimal engagement parameters faster and more accurately than any human pilot. The discussion devolved further as pilots began sharing anecdotes about obsolete equipment and tactics they had encountered during their training, treating Sarah's preparations as amusing examples of military anachronisms that persisted despite technological progress. Someone mentioned seeing World War II veterans at air shows who still talked about dogfighting as if it remained relevant to modern warfare, drawing the comparison to Sarah's focus on close-quarters combat skills. The implication was clear: her approach belonged in museums, rather than operational squadrons equipped with fifth-generation fighters. Colonel Mitchell allowed the discussion to continue for several minutes before restoring order, but his intervention carried an implicit endorsement of the criticism Sarah had received. The colonel noted that modern air combat doctrine had been developed by the most experienced military aviation experts in the world, incorporating lessons learned from decades of technological advancement and operational experience. He emphasized that the squadron's training priorities reflected current threat assessments and strategic requirements, rather than nostalgic attachment to outdated methods that had been superseded by superior approaches. The colonel's comments effectively ended any serious consideration of Sarah's tactical concerns, relegating her observations to the category of interesting but irrelevant historical perspective. He directed the briefing back to the planned exercise parameters, emphasizing the importance of demonstrating proficiency with systems and tactics that represented the current state of military aviation. The message was unmistakable. The squadron's focus would remain on mastering advanced capabilities rather than maintaining skills that contemporary warfare had rendered unnecessary. Sarah closed her leather portfolio and folded her sectional chart with deliberate calm, her expression revealing none of the frustration or embarrassment that might have been expected after such public dismissal. She had encountered similar reactions throughout her career, particularly since arriving at Falcon Ridge, where technological sophistication was valued above traditional flying skills. Her father had warned her that military aviation had become increasingly dominated by pilots who viewed computers as substitutes for fundamental airmanship rather than tools to enhance existing skills. The ready room atmosphere remained charged with the uncomfortable energy that followed Sarah's attempted contribution to the tactical discussion. Pilots exchanged glances that communicated shared relief that the awkward moment had passed, allowing them to return to mission planning that emphasized their aircraft's technological advantages. The incident reinforced existing perceptions about Sarah's place within the squadron hierarchy, confirming her status as an anachronism whose perspectives were tolerated but not seriously considered in operational planning. Staff Sergeant Santos had observed the entire exchange from her position near the maintenance desk, where she monitored radio communications and tracked aircraft status during mission briefs. As a veteran with extensive experience maintaining various aircraft types, she understood the dangers of over-reliance on sophisticated systems that could fail or be compromised under combat conditions. Santos had witnessed too many situations where pilots struggled when forced to rely on backup systems or manual procedures that required fundamental flying skills rather than computer interface proficiency. The sergeant's concerns about the squadron's technological dependency had grown during her assignment at Falcon Ridge, where she observed pilots who possessed impressive technical knowledge but limited experience with manual flight operations. She had seen similar patterns during her previous assignments, noting that pilots who maintained proficiency with basic flying skills adapted more effectively to equipment failures and degraded system performance. Santos recognized that Sarah's emphasis on fundamental airmanship represented practical preparation rather than romantic attachment to obsolete methods. Following the briefing, pilots dispersed to their assigned aircraft for the training mission that would demonstrate their proficiency with beyond visual range engagement tactics. The flight line hummed with activity as maintenance crews completed final preparations and pilots conducted their pre-flight inspections using procedures optimized for the F-35's sophisticated systems. Ground crews uploaded mission data to aircraft computers while pilots verified that their advanced sensors and weapon systems were functioning within specified parameters. Sarah's preparation routine differed markedly from her colleagues' high-tech approach to mission readiness. She conducted her pre-flight inspection of Iron Eagle with methodical thoroughness that reflected decades of training, emphasizing pilot responsibility for aircraft airworthiness, while F-35 pilots relied primarily on computer diagnostics and automated System checks. Sarah physically examined control surfaces, verified fuel levels manually, and tested backup instruments that might become critical if primary systems failed during flight. The contrast between aircraft became apparent as pilots prepared for engine start and taxi operations. F-35s featured glass cockpits with multifunction displays that presented flight information through computer interfaces, while Sarah's F-16 retained analog instruments and mechanical switches that required direct pilot manipulation. Her colleagues could access mission information, threat data, and tactical updates through voice commands and touchscreens, while Sarah relied on paper charts and manual calculations stored in kneeboard pockets, accessible during flight. Captain Harrison's F-35 represented the pinnacle of modern fighter aircraft technology, equipped with sensors that could detect and track targets at distances far exceeding the capabilities of Sarah's older radar system. His aircraft stealth characteristics made it virtually invisible to enemy detection systems, while its advanced weapons could engage multiple targets simultaneously through computer-coordinated attacks. Viper had trained extensively with these systems, developing proficiency that made him one of the squadron's most effective pilots in simulated beyond visual range combat scenarios. The mission profile called for the squadron to intercept simulated enemy aircraft, using tactics that emphasized the F-35's technological advantages over potential adversaries. Pilots would approach their targets from beyond visual range, achieving radar locks and simulated kills before enemy aircraft could detect their presence or respond effectively. The exercise was designed to demonstrate American air superiority through advanced technology rather than individual pilot skill, validating doctrine that emphasized equipment capabilities over traditional flying abilities. Lieutenant Foster occupied the cockpit of another F-35, his displays showing the comprehensive tactical picture available to pilots flying fifth-generation fighters. His aircraft sensors provided 360-degree coverage that eliminated traditional blind spots, while data link communications allowed him to share targeting information with other squadron aircraft in real time. Foster had been trained to function as a node within a larger network, coordinating his actions with other pilots through computer-mediated communications that created unprecedented tactical awareness and coordination capabilities. Sarah strapped into Iron Eagle's ejection seat with practiced efficiency, her hands moving through startup procedures that required manual operation of switches and controls that newer aircraft had automated. She verified navigation systems using backup instruments while monitoring engine parameters through analog gauges that provided immediate feedback about aircraft status. Her kneeboard contained handwritten notes about weather conditions, threat assessments, and tactical considerations that supplemented the limited information available through her aircraft's older systems. The startup sequence highlighted fundamental differences between aircraft generations and pilot training philosophies. F-35 pilots initiated computer-controlled startup procedures that automatically configured aircraft systems for flight operations, while Sarah manually operated fuel pumps, generator switches, and hydraulic controls that required pilot knowledge of aircraft systems. Her preparation reflected training that emphasized pilot responsibility for aircraft operation rather than reliance on automated systems that newer pilots often took for granted. Radio communications during taxi operations demonstrated the technological gap between aircraft types and pilot capabilities. F-35 pilots coordinated their movements through secure data link communications that provided encrypted tactical information, while Sarah relied on conventional radio procedures that had remained essentially unchanged for decades. Her communications were clear and professional, reflecting training that emphasized standardized procedures and discipline. Radio usage rather than the informal chatter that sometimes characterized squadrons equipped with advanced communication systems. The formation takeoff proceeded smoothly as pilots demonstrated their proficiency with procedures that showcased their aircraft's capabilities. F-35s lifted off with the quiet efficiency that characterized modern military aviation, their advanced flight control systems providing stability and performance that required minimal pilot input during normal operations. Sarah's F-16 required more active pilot control during takeoff and climb, demanding constant attention to engine parameters, airspeed, and flight path that newer aircraft managed automatically through computer assistance. Once airborne, the technological divide became even more pronounced as pilots began receiving targeting information through their respective sensor systems. F-35s immediately began detecting and tracking simulated enemy aircraft at ranges where Sarah's radar remained blank, their advanced sensors providing comprehensive tactical awareness that enabled early engagement decisions. The newer aircraft could coordinate their attacks through data link communications while remaining undetected by enemy systems, creating tactical advantages that seemed to validate Colonel Mitchell's emphasis on technological superiority. Sarah monitored the tactical development through radio communications and her limited radar capability, aware that her role in the exercise was primarily to serve as a training target for the F-35s to practice their engagement procedures. Her aircraft's older systems prevented her from participating meaningfully in beyond visual range combat, relegating her to observer status during the demonstration of modern air combat tactics. The situation reinforced perceptions about the irrelevance of traditional flying skills in contemporary warfare. The simulated engagement unfolded according to plan as F-35 pilots achieved radar locks and executed coordinated attacks against computer-generated enemy aircraft. Their tactics emphasized the precise coordination possible through advanced communications and sensor fusion, demonstrating kill ratios that seemed to justify the massive investment in fifth-generation fighter technology. The exercise validated training that prioritized technological proficiency over individual flying skills, supporting doctrine that viewed superior equipment as the decisive factor in air combat. However, Sarah noted tactical details that her colleagues overlooked during their successful demonstration of beyond visual range capabilities. Environmental conditions were ideal for the advanced sensors, with clear weather and minimal electronic interference that allowed systems to perform at optimal effectiveness. Her analysis suggested that different conditions might degrade the technological advantages that made the tactics effective, potentially forcing encounters where traditional skills would become relevant, despite current doctrine that dismissed such possibilities. The post-mission debrief reinforced existing attitudes about technological superiority and traditional flying skills. Colonel Mitchell praised the squadron's performance during the exercise, emphasizing how their proficiency with advanced systems had enabled them to achieve decisive tactical advantages over simulated opponents. The debrief focused on optimizing computer-assisted procedures and improving coordination through data link communications, with no discussion of contingencies where such systems might be unavailable or degraded. Sarah's observations about environmental factors and system vulnerabilities received polite but dismissive attention during the debrief session. Her concerns were acknowledged as technically accurate, but practically irrelevant given the overwhelming technological advantages that American forces enjoyed over potential adversaries. The discussion quickly returned to refining procedures for beyond visual range combat, emphasizing tactics that leverage the F-35's sophisticated capabilities, rather than preparing for scenarios where such advantages might be compromised. The day's events confirmed Sarah's position within the squadron's informal hierarchy as a competent, but outdated pilot whose perspectives belonged to an earlier era of air combat. Her colleagues respected her flying ability while dismissing her tactical philosophy as nostalgic attachment to methods that modern warfare had rendered obsolete. The consensus remained that technological superiority had fundamentally changed the nature of air combat, making traditional dogfighting skills as irrelevant as horse cavalry in mechanized warfare. Staff Sergeant Santos observed the mission results. With growing concern about the squadron's overconfidence in technological solutions to tactical problems, her maintenance experience had taught her that even the most sophisticated systems could fail unexpectedly, often at the worst possible moments when backup procedures and manual skills became critical for survival. She worried that the squadron's pilots lacked sufficient proficiency with fundamental flying techniques that might become necessary if their advanced systems were compromised during actual combat operations. The afternoon found Sarah in hangar Bay 7, conducting routine maintenance on Iron Eagle while reflecting on the morning's demonstration of technological air combat. She understood that modern doctrine emphasized capabilities that her aircraft simply couldn't match, but her training had taught her to value reliability and pilot skill over sophisticated systems that might fail when needed most. Her father's stories about air combat during the Korean War reinforced her belief that individual flying ability remained relevant regardless of technological advancement. The hangar provided a quiet refuge from the squadron's technology-focused environment, where Sarah could work on her aircraft without enduring constant reminders about the superiority of newer systems. Staff Sergeant Santos often joined her during these sessions, sharing knowledge about aircraft systems and maintenance procedures that emphasized practical understanding over computer diagnostics. Their conversations covered topics that other pilots considered irrelevant, including manual flight procedures and backup systems that might become critical during equipment failures. As evening approached, Sarah completed her aircraft inspection and returned to her quarters to prepare for the next day's missions. The squadron's attitude toward her methods had remained consistent since her arrival at Falcon Ridge, with colleagues viewing her traditional approach as interesting but obsolete. She had grown accustomed to the dismissive treatment while maintaining her commitment to training that emphasized individual skill and aircraft reliability over technological sophistication. The contrast between old and new approaches to air combat would soon be tested under conditions that no training exercise could replicate. Sarah's preparation for scenarios that others considered impossible would prove more prophetic than anyone could have imagined, as events beyond the controlled environment of Falcon Ridge would demonstrate the enduring relevance of skills that modern doctrine had dismissed as historical curiosities. The squadron scheduling board outside Colonel Mitchell's office displayed the weekly flight assignments with military precision, each pilot's name aligned with their designated missions and aircraft tail numbers. Sarah approached the board during the quiet hour before dawn, her boots echoing softly in the empty corridor as she checked for any changes to her training schedule. What she discovered caused her to pause mid-stride, reading the assignments twice to ensure she understood correctly. Her name had been systematically removed from every meaningful mission over the next 2 weeks, replaced with generic maintenance flights and basic proficiency checks that effectively sidelined her from operational training. The exclusion was methodical and comprehensive, covering not just the advanced beyond visual range exercises that showcased F-35 capabilities, but also routine patrol missions and even the multi-aircraft formation flights that typically included all available pilots regardless of aircraft type. Sarah's assignments consisted entirely of solo navigation exercises and systems checks that could be accomplished without interacting with the squadron's primary training objectives. The message was unmistakable. Her participation in serious tactical training was no longer considered necessary or valuable. Colonel Mitchell had made his decision following a private conversation with his operations officer, Major Richards, who had expressed growing frustration with Sarah's persistent focus on what he termed anachronistic tactical considerations. The Major argued that valuable briefing time was being wasted on contingency planning for scenarios that modern air combat doctrine had rendered essentially impossible. He pointed out that Sarah's questions about close-range engagement tactics and manual flying procedures distracted other pilots from mastering the sophisticated systems that would determine success in contemporary warfare. The colonel's rationale extended beyond simple efficiency concerns to encompass his vision for the squadron's future development. He had built his reputation by successfully transitioning 3 different fighter squadrons to F-35 operations, achieving consistently high ratings during inspections that emphasized technological proficiency and coordinated tactics. Mitchell viewed Sarah's traditional approach as a vestige of earlier eras that had no place in units equipped with 5th-generation fighters, designed to dominate through technological superiority rather than individual pilot skill. Major Richards had compiled a detailed analysis of training hours and resource allocation that supported the decision to reduce Sarah's participation in primary mission activities. His calculations demonstrated that Iron Eagle's older systems prevented meaningful participation in exercises designed around F-35 capabilities, while Sarah's tactical contributions consistently focused on scenarios that current doctrine considered outdated. The Major recommended concentrating training resources on pilots and aircraft that could demonstrate the advanced capabilities that defined modern air superiority. The scheduling changes reflected a broader institutional shift toward specialization and technological focus that characterized contemporary military aviation. Fighter squadrons were increasingly organized around specific aircraft capabilities rather than generic pilot skills, with training programs designed to maximize proficiency with sophisticated systems rather than develop fundamental flying abilities. Sarah's emphasis on traditional skills conflicted with this approach, making her an awkward fit within an organization optimized for technological warfare. Staff Sergeant Santos discovered the scheduling changes during her routine review of maintenance requirements for the upcoming training period. Her experience with squadron operations allowed her to recognize the pattern immediately. Sarah was being systematically excluded from meaningful participation in tactical training. Santos had observed similar situations during her career, usually involving pilots whose approaches conflicted with prevailing doctrinal preferences or command priorities that emphasized specific tactical philosophies over others. The sergeant's concerns about the exclusion extended beyond simple fairness to encompass practical considerations about squadron readiness and tactical flexibility. Her maintenance experience had taught her that diverse approaches to problem-solving often proved valuable during unexpected situations where standard procedures might prove inadequate. Santos worried that removing Sarah's perspective from tactical planning would eliminate insights that might become critical if conditions deviated from the controlled environments where current doctrine had been developed and tested. Lieutenant Foster noticed Sarah's absence from the week's major training exercises during the Monday morning briefing, when pilot assignments were announced for a complex multi-day exercise involving coordination with Navy and Marine Corps units. The exercise was designed to demonstrate joint service capabilities using advanced communications and sensor fusion that represented the pinnacle of modern military aviation technology. Foster assumed that Sarah's exclusion reflected the obvious incompatibility between Iron Eagle's limited capabilities and the sophisticated requirements of inter-service coordination. Captain Harrison viewed the scheduling changes as long overdue recognition of tactical realities that made Sarah's participation in advanced training exercises counterproductive for squadron development. He argued privately that her focus on obsolete contingencies detracted from the precision and coordination required for modern air combat operations. Viper believed that training time should be concentrated on pilots who could demonstrate the advanced capabilities that defined contemporary military aviation rather than accommodate approaches that belonged to earlier technological eras. The exclusion became apparent to other squadron members through casual observations rather than official announcements, creating an atmosphere of uncomfortable awareness that Sarah's status within the unit had changed significantly. Pilots who had previously included her in informal tactical discussions began excluding her from conversations about upcoming missions and training objectives. The social dynamics reflected the official assessment that her perspectives were no longer relevant to the squadron's primary operational focus. Sarah learned about her new status during a brief meeting with Colonel Mitchell in his office, where the walls displayed photographs of F-35s in formation and certificates, recognizing the squadron's achievements with advanced tactical systems. The colonel explained his decision with professional courtesy, emphasizing that resource allocation required focusing training opportunities on pilots and aircraft that could demonstrate current operational capabilities. He noted that Iron Eagle systems limitations prevented meaningful participation in exercises designed around fifth-generation fighter capabilities. The colonel's explanation emphasized efficiency and modernization rather than any criticism of Sarah's individual flying ability or professional competence. He described the decision as reflecting evolving squadron priorities that required concentrating training resources on advanced systems and tactics rather than maintaining proficiency with older approaches that contemporary warfare had rendered obsolete. Mitchell stressed that the changes reflected institutional requirements rather than personal judgments about individual pilot capabilities. Sarah listened to the colonel's explanation without interruption, her expression revealing none of the disappointment or frustration that might have been expected following such comprehensive exclusion from meaningful training activities. She had anticipated this development since arriving at Falcon Ridge, recognizing that her approach to air combat preparation conflicted fundamentally with the squadron's technological emphasis. Her father had warned her that military aviation was increasingly dominated by specialists who viewed advanced systems as substitutes for traditional flying skills rather than enhancements to existing capabilities. The meeting concluded with Colonel Mitchell's assurance that Sarah would continue receiving appropriate training opportunities suited to her aircraft's capabilities and her experience level. He emphasized that the squadron valued her contributions, while noting that operational requirements demanded focusing primary training resources on systems and tactics that represented the current state of military aviation. The colonel suggested that Sarah's experience with older systems might prove valuable for specialized missions that required familiarity with legacy equipment. Following the meeting, Sarah returned to Hangar Bay 7, where Iron Eagle sat amid maintenance equipment and spare parts that reflected the practical reality of operating older aircraft within squadrons optimized for newer systems. The F-16's position at the far end of the flight line symbolized her marginalized status within an organization that measured success through technological sophistication rather than fundamental flying competence. She began planning how to maintain her readiness despite official exclusion from primary training activities. Staff Sergeant Santos approached Sarah later that afternoon with maintenance schedules that would allow continued flight operations, despite the reduced training assignments. The sergeant had carefully arranged aircraft availability and fuel allocation to ensure that Iron Eagle could maintain operational status while accommodating the squadron's primary focus on F-35 training activities. Santos understood that Sarah's exclusion from major exercises didn't diminish the importance of maintaining proficiency with skills that might become critical under unexpected circumstances. The practical implications of Sarah's new status became apparent during the week's flight operations, when she found herself conducting solo navigation exercises while the rest of the squadron participated in coordinated tactics training. Her missions consisted primarily of basic proficiency flights that maintained currency requirements without contributing to the advanced tactical development that defined the squadron's primary training objectives. The isolation was both professional and social, separating her from the collaborative environment that characterized modern military aviation training. Captain Thompson observed Sarah's solo flights with a mixture of sympathy and relief, recognizing that her exclusion eliminated potential complications during complex training exercises that required precise coordination between multiple aircraft. He believed that Iron Eagle systems' limitations would have prevented effective participation in advanced tactics that relied on sensor fusion and data link communications. Thompson viewed the scheduling changes as practical recognition of technological realities rather than personal rejection of Sarah's individual capabilities. The squadron's training exercises proceeded more smoothly without the complications that Sarah's different approach had previously introduced into tactical planning sessions. Briefings focused exclusively on optimizing F-35 capabilities and coordinating advanced tactics without the need to accommodate alternative approaches or address contingencies that current doctrine considered unlikely. Pilots reported improved focus and efficiency during mission planning that emphasized their aircraft's sophisticated systems rather than generic flying skills. Major Richards tracked training metrics that demonstrated improved performance following Sarah's exclusion from primary tactical exercises. The data showed reduced briefing times, more consistent execution of planned tactics, and higher scores during simulated engagements that emphasized beyond visual range capabilities. The Major cited these improvements as validation of the decision to concentrate training resources on pilots and systems that could demonstrate current operational requirements rather than accommodate outdated approaches. However, Staff Sergeant Santos noticed subtle changes in squadron dynamics that concerned her professional judgment about tactical readiness and adaptability. She observed increased dependence on automated systems and reduced proficiency with manual procedures that might become necessary during equipment failures or degraded operating conditions. Santos worried that the squadron's focus on technological solutions was creating vulnerabilities that might prove critical if pilots were forced to rely on fundamental flying skills rather than computer assistance. The exclusion extended beyond flight assignments to encompass tactical planning sessions and professional development activities that had previously included all squadron pilots regardless of aircraft type. Sarah found herself excluded from threat briefings, intelligence updates, and tactical discussions that might have provided insights relevant to air combat operations. The comprehensive nature of her marginalization reflected institutional commitment to technological specialization rather than broad-based tactical competence. Sarah adapted to her new circumstances by developing independent training programs that maintained proficiency with skills that the squadron no longer considered relevant to contemporary warfare. She practiced formation flying techniques using visual references rather than data link coordination, navigation procedures that relied on compass headings and landmark identification, and gunnery skills that emphasized manual tracking and pilot-computed firing solutions. Her preparation reflected commitment to capabilities that might prove essential if advanced systems failed or were compromised. The solitary nature of Sarah's training allowed her to focus on fundamental skills without the distractions and compromises that characterized group exercises designed around F-35 capabilities. She could practice energy management techniques, defensive maneuvering, and tactical positioning that required sustained attention to basic flying principles rather than computer interface procedures. Her flights became laboratories for testing and refining approaches that emphasized pilot skill over technological assistance. During one particularly intensive training session, Sarah practiced close-range combat, maneuvering that her father had taught her using principles developed during the Korean War. She flew precise turning fights against imaginary opponents, practicing energy conservation and position management that required constant attention to airspeed, altitude, and aircraft orientation. The exercises demanded physical conditioning and mental focus that contrasted sharply with the computer-assisted procedures that characterized modern air combat training. Staff Sergeant Santos observed these solo training flights with professional appreciation for Sarah's commitment to maintaining skills that other pilots had abandoned in favor of technological solutions. The sergeant recognized that Sarah's approach represented practical preparation for situations where advanced systems might prove unavailable or insufficient for mission accomplishment. Santos understood that real combat often presented challenges that training exercises couldn't replicate, making individual skill and adaptability more valuable than technological proficiency alone. The squadron's weekly tactical review meetings proceeded without Sarah's participation, focusing exclusively on optimizing F-35 capabilities and refining coordination procedures that emphasize sensor fusion and data link communications. These sessions demonstrated consistent improvement in measured performance criteria while revealing decreased attention to contingency planning and alternative approaches that might prove necessary under different operational conditions. Meetings reflected institutional confidence in technological solutions to tactical challenges. Colonel Mitchell reviewed squadron performance data that showed measurable improvements following the reorganization of training priorities to emphasize F-35 capabilities over generic pilot skills. The statistics demonstrated reduced training times, improved coordination during complex exercises, and higher success rates during simulated combat scenarios. Mitchell cited these results as validation of his decision to focus squadron resources on advanced systems rather than accommodate outdated approaches that contemporary doctrine had superseded. However, experienced maintenance personnel like Staff Sergeant Santos recognized potential problems with the squadron's increasing dependence on sophisticated systems that required specific operating conditions to function effectively. Their professional experience encompassed situations where advanced equipment had failed unexpectedly, forcing pilots to rely on backup procedures and manual skills that many younger aviators had never fully developed. Santos worried that the squadron's technological focus was creating vulnerabilities rather than advantages. The institutional pressure to demonstrate F-35 capabilities led to training scenarios that emphasized ideal operating conditions where advanced systems could perform at maximum effectiveness. Exercises were conducted in clear weather with minimal electronic interference, using threat scenarios that allowed sophisticated sensors and weapons to demonstrate their technological advantages. The controlled environment validated current doctrine, while providing limited preparation for conditions where such advantages might be compromised or unavailable. Sarah's exclusion from these exercises eliminated the alternative perspective that might have identified potential weaknesses in tactics that relied exclusively on technological superiority. Her questions about contingency planning and alternative approaches had been dismissed as irrelevant, but they reflected practical considerations about combat situations where ideal conditions might not exist. The squadron's focus on demonstrating advanced capabilities prevented serious consideration of scenarios where different approaches might prove necessary. The professional isolation that accompanied Sarah's exclusion extended to social interactions within the squadron, where conversations increasingly focused on F-35 systems and advanced tactics rather than general aviation topics that might include pilots flying older aircraft. She found herself excluded from informal discussions about tactical innovations and professional development opportunities that assumed familiarity with fifth-generation fighter capabilities. The social dynamics reinforced her marginalized status within the unit's hierarchy. As the weeks progressed, Sarah's training schedule remained limited to basic proficiency flights and routine maintenance operations that kept her current but prevented participation in the advanced tactical development that defined the squadron's primary mission. Her flights became opportunities to refine individual skills and test alternative approaches to air combat problems, preparation that seemed increasingly irrelevant within an organization committed to technological solutions over traditional flying abilities. The comprehensive nature of Sarah's exclusion from meaningful training activities represented more than simple scheduling decisions. It reflected fundamental changes in military aviation that prioritized technological specialization over broad-based tactical competence. Her situation symbolized the tension between traditional approaches that emphasized individual skill and modern doctrine that viewed advanced systems as decisive factors in contemporary warfare. Staff Sergeant Santos continued supporting Sarah's independent training efforts while observing the squadron's increasing dependence on sophisticated systems that required ideal conditions to function effectively. The sergeant's experience suggested that combat often presented challenges that training exercises couldn't anticipate, making adaptability and individual skill more valuable than technological proficiency alone. Santos recognized that Sarah's marginalization might prove costly if circumstances required capabilities that the squadron had chosen not to maintain. The emergency klaxon pierced the pre-dawn silence at Falcon Ridge Air Force Base with urgent intensity that immediately distinguished this alert from routine training exercises. Sarah jolted awake in her quarters, recognizing the specific pattern that indicated real-world operational deployment rather than scheduled drills. Within minutes, the base transformed from peaceful dormancy to controlled chaos as personnel responded to their first genuine combat alert in over 18 months. The overhead speakers crackled with terse announcements, directing all flight crew to immediate briefing while maintenance teams rushed to prepare aircraft for rapid deployment. The squadron ready room filled with pilots arriving in various states of readiness, some still securing their flight suits while others frantically reviewed abbreviated mission briefings on hastily distributed tablets. Colonel Mitchell entered with Major Richards close behind, both carrying classified folders that indicated the severity of whatever situation had triggered the emergency response. The colonel's expression revealed none of the measured confidence that typically characterized his demeanor during routine training exercises, replaced instead by the focused intensity that combat veterans recognized as preparation for genuine danger. Intelligence reports indicated that an unidentified formation of advanced fighter aircraft had violated international airspace over the Pacific, approaching territorial waters with apparent hostile intent. Satellite reconnaissance and electronic intelligence gathering suggested at least 5 aircraft of unknown origin, displaying sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities that had successfully jammed several monitoring stations along the regional defense perimeter. The intruders had ignored repeated warnings to alter course and identify themselves, maintaining radio silence while continuing their aggressive approach toward strategically sensitive areas. Colonel Mitchell outlined the squadron's mission with clinical precision that reflected years of training for exactly this type of scenario. 6 F-35s would launch immediately to intercept the hostile formation, using their stealth capabilities and advanced sensors to achieve decisive tactical advantages. Before the intruders could threaten friendly installations or escape to international waters, the mission emphasized beyond visual range engagement tactics that would neutralize threats while minimizing risk to American aircraft and personnel through technological superiority and coordinated attacks. Captain Harrison received assignment as flight leader, his experience with F-35 systems and proven proficiency during training exercises making him the obvious choice for commanding the intercept mission. Lieutenant Foster and Captain Thompson were designated as his wingmen, forming a 3-aircraft element that would approach the hostile formation from optimal positioning to maximize their technological advantages. The remaining F-35s would provide backup support and coordinate with ground-based radar installations to ensure comprehensive coverage of the engagement area. Sarah listened to the mission briefing with growing unease as she realized that Iron Eagle was not mentioned in the tactical plan despite her presence in the ready room during the emergency response. Colonel Mitchell's assignments included every available F-35, while omitting any reference to the F-16 or its pilot, effectively excluding her from the squadron's most important mission since her arrival at Falcon Ridge. The omission reflected institutional confidence in technological solutions over traditional capabilities even during genuine combat operations. The tactical plan emphasized coordinated attacks, using advanced missiles and sensor fusion that would allow F-35s to engage hostile aircraft before being detected themselves. Intelligence assessments suggested that the intruders possessed sophisticated, but not fifth-generation capabilities, creating favorable conditions for American technological advantages to prove decisive. The mission profile assumed optimal performance from advanced systems, under conditions that training exercises had validated repeatedly during controlled scenarios. Staff Sergeant Santos observed the frantic preparation activities while monitoring maintenance status for all squadron aircraft, including Iron Eagle despite its exclusion from the planned mission. Her professional instincts suggested potential complications that the optimistic mission planning might not have anticipated, particularly regarding electronic warfare capabilities that the hostile aircraft had already demonstrated against ground-based installations. Santos understood that combat operations often presented unexpected challenges that training scenarios couldn't replicate accurately. The F-35s launched with impressive efficiency that demonstrated the squadron's proficiency with procedures they had practiced countless times during training exercises. Advanced systems activated automatically as the aircraft climbed toward their assigned intercept altitude, providing pilots with comprehensive tactical awareness through sensor fusion and data link communications. The formation proceeded according to plan while ground controllers monitored their progress through secure communications and radar tracking that confirmed optimal positioning for the planned engagement. Sarah remained in the ready room as the primary force departed, watching tactical displays that showed friendly aircraft approaching the projected intercept area, where hostile contacts continued their aggressive course toward territorial waters. The electronic warfare environment appeared more complex than initial intelligence reports had suggested, with jamming signals affecting various monitoring systems in patterns that indicated sophisticated countermeasures. Her exclusion from the mission left her as an observer rather than participant in the squadron's most critical operation. Initial contact occurred exactly as mission planners had anticipated, with F-35 sensors detecting hostile aircraft at maximum range while remaining undetected themselves through stealth technology. Captain Harrison reported successful radar locks on multiple targets as his formation maneuvered into optimal attack positions using tactics that emphasized their technological advantages. The engagement seemed to validate training doctrine that prioritized beyond visual range capabilities over traditional air combat skills that contemporary warfare had supposedly rendered obsolete. However, the tactical situation deteriorated rapidly when hostile aircraft activated comprehensive electronic warfare systems that exceeded intelligence estimates of their capabilities. Powerful jamming signals disrupted F-35 sensor systems and data link communications simultaneously, eliminating the technological advantages that American tactics depended upon for mission success. Pilots found themselves flying essentially blind, as their sophisticated displays flickered with interference patterns, while their coordinated attack plan collapsed into confusion and individual survival instincts. Captain Harrison's voice crackled through radio static as he reported system failures that left his aircraft operating on backup instruments and limited radar capability. His formations scattered as pilots struggled to maintain situational awareness. Without the sensor fusion and communications that their training had assumed would remain available throughout the engagement, the technological superiority that had seemed decisive during planning phases evaporated under electronic attack that neutralized F-35 advantages while exposing vulnerabilities that doctrine had failed to anticipate. Lieutenant Foster found himself isolated from his wingmen and unable to locate hostile aircraft that his compromised sensors could no longer track effectively. His training had emphasized computer-assisted procedures that required functional data links and sensor systems, leaving him poorly prepared for manual flying and visual navigation under combat conditions. Foster's panicked radio calls reflected the confusion that affected all F-35 pilots as their sophisticated systems failed under electronic warfare pressure that exceeded their design specifications. The hostile formation exploited American confusion by closing rapidly to visual range where their numerical superiority and aggressive tactics created overwhelming tactical pressure. 5 enemy aircraft surrounded the scattered F-35s using coordinated maneuvers that demonstrated skilled pilots, flying aircraft optimized for close-range combat rather than beyond visual range engagements. The tactical reversal caught American pilots unprepared for dogfighting scenarios that their training had deemed obsolete in contemporary warfare. Captain Thompson transmitted emergency calls for assistance as hostile aircraft achieved firing positions that threatened multiple F-35s simultaneously. His sophisticated countermeasures proved ineffective against close-range attacks, while his limited experience with defensive maneuvering left him vulnerable to enemies who possessed superior positioning and tactical initiative. The engagement that had begun with American technological advantages had become a close-quarters combat situation where individual pilot skill determined survival rather than computer-assisted capabilities. Colonel Mitchell monitored the deteriorating situation from the command center while Major Richards coordinated with intelligence personnel who struggled to understand how their assessments had proven so inaccurate. The electronic warfare environment continued disrupting communications and sensor systems that American tactics depended upon, while hostile aircraft demonstrated capabilities that exceeded initial intelligence estimates. The mission that had seemed straightforward during planning phases had become a tactical disaster that threatened multiple American aircraft and crews. Sarah listened to increasingly desperate radio communications that revealed the complete breakdown of planned tactics and the immediate danger facing her squadron mates. She recognized that the electronic warfare environment had eliminated technological advantages while forcing the type of close-range engagement that her training had emphasized but that current doctrine considered unlikely. Her exclusion from the mission now seemed less like professional rejection than tactical oversight that had removed relevant capabilities from the available response options. Staff Sergeant Santos approached Sarah with urgency that reflected her understanding of the crisis developing in the combat area. The sergeant pointed out that Iron Eagle remained fully operational and ready for immediate launch, its older systems potentially less vulnerable to electronic warfare that was disrupting F-35 capabilities. Santos suggested that Sarah's traditional training might prove more relevant to current tactical conditions than the advanced procedures that were failing under actual combat pressure. The decision to launch required immediate action without waiting for official authorization that might come too late to affect the engagement outcome. Sarah understood that taking off without orders would violate regulations and potentially end her military career, but she also recognized that her squadron mates were facing life-threatening situations where her capabilities might prove decisive. Her father's stories about combat situations where individual initiative had saved lives provided context for choosing between regulatory compliance and tactical necessity. Sarah ran toward Iron Eagle while Staff Sergeant Santos initiated emergency engine start procedures that would minimize launch delays. The F-16's older systems activated with reliable simplicity that contrasted sharply with the sophisticated startup sequences that F-35s required under normal conditions. Her aircraft's analog instruments and mechanical controls remained unaffected by electronic interference that was disrupting computer-dependent systems throughout the tactical area. The unauthorized takeoff proceeded without ground control coordination. As Sarah configured Iron Eagle for maximum performance and climbed rapidly toward the engagement area, her navigation relied on compass headings and visual landmarks rather than GPS systems that electronic warfare might compromise. while her situational awareness developed through radio monitoring and tactical analysis rather than sensor displays. The approach reflected training that emphasized pilot skill over technological assistance during challenging operational conditions. Radio communications revealed that the tactical situation had become critical as F-35 pilots struggled to defend themselves against coordinated attacks by hostile aircraft that possessed both numerical superiority and tactical initiative. Captain Harrison reported multiple system failures while requesting immediate assistance from any available aircraft, regardless of type or capability. His transmission reflected desperation that military professionals rarely expressed during radio communications, indicating genuine fear for survival rather than concern about mission success. Sarah reached the combat area as hostile aircraft pressed their attacks against scattered F-35s that were operating with degraded systems and limited tactical coordination. Her visual identification confirmed 5 enemy fighters engaged in aggressive maneuvering against 3 American aircraft that appeared unable to coordinate their defensive actions effectively. The tactical picture matched scenarios that her father had described from his Korean War experience, where numerical disadvantages were overcome through superior flying skill and tactical positioning. The engagement that followed demonstrated the enduring relevance of traditional air combat skills that modern doctrine had dismissed as obsolete relics from earlier technological eras. Sarah's approach emphasized energy management and positional awareness rather than advanced sensors and coordinated tactics, allowing her to exploit vulnerabilities that the hostile formation had developed while pursuing their attacks against the F-35s. Her aircraft's gun system provided reliable firepower that remained effective regardless of electronic warfare environment. The first enemy aircraft fell to Sarah's precisely aimed cannon fire as she executed a high-speed pass that combined her approach angle with optimal firing position. Her gunnery skills reflected thousands of practice rounds and manual calculations that enabled accurate shooting without computer assistance, proving that traditional marksmanship remained lethal when applied with sufficient skill and tactical understanding. The successful engagement demonstrated that pilot ability could overcome technological disadvantages under appropriate conditions. Sarah's tactical maneuvering disrupted the hostile formation's coordinated attacks while providing opportunities for the surviving F-35s to recover their defensive positions and coordinate counterattacks. Her presence forced enemy aircraft to divide their attention between multiple threats, rather than concentrating their numerical superiority against isolated American fighters. The tactical shift reflected classic air combat principles where individual initiative could influence engagement outcomes through skilled execution rather than technological superiority. The second and third kills followed in rapid succession as Sarah exploited the confusion that her initial attack had created within the hostile formation. Her energy management allowed sustained maneuvering that kept enemy aircraft defensive, while preventing them from regaining tactical initiative through coordinated attacks. Each engagement demonstrated precise flying and accurate gunnery that reflected years of training with skills that other pilots had abandoned in favor of computer-assisted procedures. Captain Harrison witnessed Sarah's performance with amazement that gradually replaced his earlier dismissal of traditional air combat techniques. Her demonstration of sustained defensive maneuvering and accurate gun attacks provided practical education about capabilities that training exercises had failed to develop among F-35 pilots. Harrison began coordinating his defensive actions with Sarah's attacks, creating tactical cooperation that multiplied the effectiveness of both aircraft, despite their different technological capabilities. The fourth enemy aircraft attempted to escape the engagement area as its formation's tactical situation deteriorated beyond recovery. But Sarah's pursuit demonstrated superior energy management that enabled her to close the distance while maintaining firing position. Her gunnery skills proved decisive again, as precisely aimed cannon rounds eliminated the fleeing aircraft before it could reach safety. The engagement validated traditional pursuit tactics that emphasized pilot skill over technological assistance for achieving successful intercepts. The final hostile aircraft found itself isolated and outnumbered as the tactical situation reversed completely from the initial engagement, where American forces had seemed overwhelmed. Sarah's disruption of the enemy formation had allowed F-35 pilots to recover their situational awareness and coordinate effective defensive actions that eliminated the numerical advantages that had seemed decisive earlier. The last enemy pilot chose discretion over valor, attempting rapid escape toward international waters rather than continuing combat against superior opposition. Sarah's pursuit of the escaping aircraft demonstrated energy conservation principles that her father had taught her decades earlier, allowing her to maintain optimal positioning while closing distance for a final gun attack. Her flying reflected mastery of fundamental aerodynamics and tactical geometry that enabled precise maneuvering without computer assistance or advanced flight controls. The successful intercept eliminated the last hostile aircraft while completing a tactical reversal that had seemed impossible when the engagement began. The return flight to Falcon Ridge proceeded in relative silence as pilots processed the dramatic events that had challenged their understanding of modern air combat effectiveness. F-35 pilots transmitted brief status reports while avoiding detailed discussion of system failures and tactical confusion that had nearly resulted in multiple losses. Sarah maintained radio discipline while planning her explanation for the unauthorized launch that had saved her squadron mates but violated explicit orders about mission participation. The post-mission debrief revealed the extent to which electronic warfare had disrupted systems and tactics that American doctrine assumed would remain effective under combat conditions. Intelligence analysts struggled to explain how enemy capabilities had exceeded their assessments, while tacticians reconsidered assumptions about technological superiority that the engagement had challenged fundamentally. The mission had succeeded through individual initiative and traditional skills rather than advanced systems and coordinated procedures. Colonel Mitchell faced the uncomfortable reality that his most marginalized pilot had achieved decisive tactical success while his preferred approaches had failed under actual combat conditions. Sarah's unauthorized participation had violated regulations, but saved lives and completed the mission when technological solutions had proved inadequate. The colonel's debrief focused on lessons learned rather than disciplinary action, recognizing that combat results validated capabilities that peacetime doctrine had dismissed as irrelevant. Captain Harrison approached Sarah after the formal debrief with genuine respect that replaced his earlier dismissive attitude toward traditional air combat skills. He acknowledged that her demonstration had provided education about capabilities that modern training had neglected while proving the continued relevance of individual flying ability under challenging conditions. Harrison's recognition reflected broader squadron awareness that technological advantages required backup capabilities when sophisticated systems failed or were compromised. Staff Sergeant Santos observed the changed atmosphere within the squadron as pilots discussed Sarah's performance and reconsidered their assumptions about the relationship between technology and tactical effectiveness. Her maintenance experience had suggested that sophisticated systems created vulnerabilities as well as advantages, making traditional skills valuable insurance against equipment failures and enemy countermeasures. Santos felt vindicated in her support for diverse approaches to tactical problems rather than exclusive reliance on technological solutions. The mission's outcome prompted comprehensive review of training priorities and tactical doctrine that had proven inadequate under actual combat conditions. Sarah's success demonstrated that traditional skills remained relevant despite technological advancement, while also revealing dangerous gaps in preparation that had left F-35 pilots vulnerable when their advanced systems failed. The engagement provided practical education about combat realities that training exercises had failed to replicate accurately. General Patricia Williams arrived at Falcon Ridge to conduct personal interviews with all mission participants and review the tactical lessons that the engagement had revealed about American air combat capabilities. Her combat experience enabled her to recognize the significance of Sarah's performance while understanding the institutional resistance that had marginalized traditional skills in favor of technological solutions. The general's investigation would influence training doctrine and operational procedures throughout the Air Force. Sarah's meeting with General Williams focused on the tactical principles and training methods that had enabled her success during the engagement rather than the regulatory violations that her unauthorized launch had represented. The general recognized that combat effectiveness required individual initiative and diverse capabilities rather than strict adherence to procedures that might prove inadequate under unexpected conditions. Williams understood that military institutions needed to balance technological advancement with maintenance of fundamental skills that remained relevant under challenging circumstances. The squadron's attitude toward Sarah changed dramatically as pilots who had previously dismissed her methods sought instruction about traditional air combat techniques that the engagement had proven remained effective. Her knowledge about energy management, gunnery skills, and defensive maneuvering became valued assets rather than obsolete curiosities, while Iron Eagle gained respect as a capable aircraft rather than an outdated relic. The transformation reflected practical recognition that combat success required diverse capabilities rather than exclusive reliance on technological advantages. Training programs at Falcon Ridge underwent comprehensive revision to incorporate traditional air combat skills alongside advanced systems training, ensuring that pilots possessed backup capabilities when sophisticated technology failed or was compromised. Sarah's role within the squadron evolved from marginalized outsider to valued instructor whose experience provided essential education about capabilities that modern doctrine had neglected. Her vindication came not through official recognition but through practical demonstration that traditional skills remained relevant in contemporary warfare. The engagement's lessons influenced Air Force training doctrine throughout the service as commanders recognized that technological superiority required foundation skills that remained effective when advanced systems failed. Sarah's success provided a template for balanced training that emphasized both sophisticated capabilities and traditional techniques, ensuring that pilots possessed diverse options for responding to unexpected tactical situations. Her story became an example of how individual competence and institutional wisdom could complement rather than conflict with technological advancement. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.